Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. And I thank my good friend, our wonderful chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee for the time, and I thank the ranking member as well. And what a joy it's been to work with my Florida colleague, Ted Deutsch, on this important bill for such a long time. And, Mr. Speaker, we have before us a concurrent resolution introduced by our wonderful Florida Senator Bill Nelson. And this measure follows a similar bipartisan resolution that my South Florida friend Ted Deutsch and I introduced earlier this year, which this body passed unanimously in June. The vote was 363 to 0. And I want to thank Senator Nelson as well as Senator Collins for taking the lead on this initiative in the Senate, and for the Senate taking action, passing this important resolution, bringing it back to us. I want to thank Chairman Royce, Ranking Member Engel for their support on this measure and helping it get to the floor today. This bipartisan resolution, Mr. Speaker, is simple, but it's so important. It calls on Germany to honor its moral and historical obligations to all Holocaust survivors and to provide for their unmet needs immediately and comprehensively. That is something that going to happen thanks to all of the good men and women here. And for Ted and for me and for Senator Nelson, this issue hits very close to home, Mr. Speaker. As members of Congress from the state of Florida, we represent thousands of Holocaust survivors. Some 15,000 are estimated to be living in South Florida alone, but it hits even closer to home today. Why? Because when I spoke on this floor in June in support of the version that Mr. Deutsch and I introduced in the House, I mentioned several of the Holocaust survivors whom Ted and I have been honored to call our dear friends. And among them was a remarkable and incomparable gentleman named Jack Rubin. Well, sadly, Jack passed away July 18th at the age of 88. Jack and his two sisters survived the unimaginable, Mr. Speaker, the atrocities of humanity's darkest period. Jack managed to survive the nightmares of Auschwitz and 3 other death camps, 4 in total, until he, as he testified in Congress in 2008, quote, he was liberated on May 1st, 1945 from hell by the U.S. Army, end quote. And once Jack came to the United States, he served in the U.S. Army. That's how much he loved his country, for all his new country, for all that Jack had witnessed, for all that Jack had lived through. Somehow he drew strength from his trials and from his tribulations and became a leading force in the fight for justice and dignity for all Holocaust survivors. And on this issue that we have before us, Mr. Speaker, Jack was an unwavering voice and a force for justice. He led the call for Germany to honor its commitments, to provide for all of the survivors' medical, mental, and home care needs. Thankfully, Jack lived to see the House pass our resolution. He even lived to see the Claims Conference in Germany announce an alleged major expansion in home care for Holocaust survivors. But, Mr. Speaker, I think that if Jack were here today, he would say, but we must do more. You see, as part of the heralded announcement by the Claims Conference in Germany, Germany was supposed to lift the home health home care caps for all concentration camp and ghetto survivors. Yet the sad truth is, Mr. Speaker, according to the reports that we have seen, that this claim is just not true. Many survivors are still subjected to arbitrary caps on home care hours, some even having their weekly hours reduced. What has happened? To make matters worse, the Claims Conference in Germany's recent negotiations did not even address the horrendous shortfalls in funding for emergency services such as medicines, medical care, dental care, hearing aids, and other vital services for survivors. This omission is inexcusable, Mr. Speaker. It will cause further needless suffering and deaths among survivors in need of help. Germany has an obligation to do better than that, and I'm optimistic that it will. We have an obligation to Holocaust survivors to do better, to ensure that they live out their days in the dignity and comfort that they deserve. What does this mean, Mr. Speaker? It means full funding for all health and welfare needs for all survivors. This is why this resolution before us today is so timely and so important. My friend Jack, know that he was Mr. Deutsch's friend as well. He dedicated his life to justice for all Holocaust survivors. And so it is up to us to keep fighting for all the Jack Rubins of the world, to continue Jack's legacy until justice is finally won. And I will keep fighting for Jack's legacy and for all survivors. And I urge my colleagues to do the right thing, to support this resolution. We have to urge our German friends to do more, to do the right thing for all Holocaust survivors. And passing this resolution will send that strong message that we believe that the job is not yet done, that more must be done. And those of us, like Mr. Deutsch, like Mr. Royce, Mr. Engel, who have been at the forefront, Senators Nelson and Collins, at the forefront of the fight for Holocaust survivors' rights and needs and interests, are grateful for the unanimous support of our colleagues in the House and in the Senate for these resolutions. Mr. Speaker, it's been over 70 years since humanity's darkest period, yet many survivors today still face lingering injustices of the Holocaust. We've had opportunities to address these injustices, and indeed we've had obligation to address them, to try to fix the wrongs of the past. Germany has acknowledged its responsibility. It has acknowledged its obligations to Holocaust survivors. Congress has acknowledged that we have a moral obligation to survivors, many of whom are American citizens, many of whom are our constituents, many of whom live today at or below the poverty level. We must acknowledge that too many Holocaust survivors are forced, even today, over 70 years later, continue to suffer the injustices of the past and the indifference of the present. But for the survivors who remain, and for all whom we have lost, we must, and we are here today, to take a stand that we hope Chancellor Merkel of Germany and the German government itself will hear our pleas for action, will take them to heart, so that the remaining survivors may live out their lives in the comfort and the dignity that they deserve. And in closing, Mr. Speaker, I would say if we are going to stand for justice for all survivors, then we must also acknowledge the other still unresolved injustices being inflicted on Holocaust survivors in our time. Specifically, the act of being denied their day in court. It is simply unconscionable that insurance agencies such as Allianz and Generali have managed to dishonor tens of thousands of insurance policies they sold to Jews in Europe before the Holocaust, and they continue to deny Holocaust survivors and their families these paid-for obligations. To this day, they refuse to acknowledge this. So the obligations of the insurers are moral and financial. I believe it is imperative that this Congress rectify this unfortunate reality that makes Holocaust survivors second-class citizens by denying them access to U.S. courts and attempts to reclaim these families' legacies. Well, it's quite simply a right that they have been denied for too long. We cannot bring them back. We cannot correct the problems that happened in the past, but we can correct them now, Mr. Speaker. We can correct them for the heirs who deserve justice. It is within our power to do so. So, Mr. Speaker, I applaud my colleagues in Congress for supporting this resolution. I thank them for lending voices to the cause of justice for all Holocaust survivors. And this is just one step. It is an important step in the long road to justice, and I implore my friends and colleagues to continue to do more in support for all Holocaust survivors. And I thank my good friend, the chairman of our committee, for this time.